This is a Socialist News and Views special interview.
I'm Nick Schillingford, coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this special interview. Yeah, so on Socialist News and Views, we let folks introduce themselves. Do you want to just tell our audience who you are?
Sure. I'm John Wallace. I'm the president of the Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance. I'm relatively recently retired from two careers. One as an environmental educator at Southern Illinois University's Touch of Nature Environmental Center outside of Carbondale, Illinois. And the other most recently is the Cedar Lake manager, which is a municipal water source and recreation reservoir built by the city of Carbondale and maintained by the city of Carbondale. It's a 1,750 acre lake, and most recently retired from that. But before then and throughout all this time, and I continue to be a forest activist with a real focus on forest in the central hardwood region. And I should say that I'm also on the board of the Heartwood organization, which is a network of primarily forest activists in the central hardwood region of the U.S., where we find deciduous forests. Our motto with Heartwood is helping people helping people protect the places that they love. I'm also the president of the Shawnee chapter of Illinois Audubon Society, which is a chapter of Illinois Audubon Society, the oldest non-governmental conservation organization in the state, which is separate from National Audubon Society, that most people are familiar with.
Oh, sure.
And like I said, I've been an activist all through my career, and still remain an activist in this region of the central hardwoods.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of things going on in Shawnee National Forest in Southern Illinois. Do you want to talk a little bit about the most important things that you're working on? Right now, obviously the most immediate things that you want people to kind of know about as far as the importance and potential issues there in Shawnee National Forest. What's going on?
Sure, Nick. I'd appreciate that opportunity. So first of all, one of the things I really like to talk about is of all of the things that our country, good and bad, that revolve around the United States of America, to me, one of the best features is this focus on public land. And America has many different types of public lands, but it's land that's generally set aside for the benefit of the masses. It's very important. Unfortunately, even though we have public lands, especially federal lands, not all of it we tend to think that is protected, and not all of it is. And I happen to live in the state of Illinois. When people think of forests, they generally don't think of Illinois, but Illinois is a state that's 390 miles long from the Wisconsin border to the Ohio and Mississippi rivers in the southern tip. So it's a very long state, and I live farther south than most of the state of Kentucky. Where those two rivers meet it's more southern than it is, a central Midwest. It has a more of a southern flavor to it. And this area, unlike the majority of the state of Illinois, is unglaciated. And as a result, we have these hills and valleys and rock escarpments and streams and springs that are uncharacteristics for the rest of the state of Illinois. And the more natural vegetation in the rest of the state is usually prairie and prairie and savannas and oak savannas and barrens and things like that.
Yep.
Down here, they're eastern deciduous mesophytic forests. Our forests are. This area is very moist. We get a lot of rainfall, and the soils and the way the land lays, it tends to be very moist as opposed to some of the other parts of the state. So we're really unique. But down in that southern tip, we have, because of all the hills and because this area wasn't easy to make a living off of by exploiting the land, farming, things like that, it was available to the federal government after a lot of work, and about 300,000 acres now was established back. We're up to 300,000 acres right now, but
that's the Shawnee National Forest.
That's where
300,000 acres. Okay.
When the Shawnee was established, it wasn't that large, but it was in 1939.
Oh, sure.
And, the state's only national forest, and it's the largest single ownership of land that we have in Illinois. And so it's a special place. We've got several different issues going on right now. Unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, which manages the Shawnee National Forest, views our forests as a resource to extract natural components from, and not that all that is bad, but there really isn't a need to extract a lot of extract resources off of public land, especially when it comes to timber. And what the Forest Service is known for more than any other resource. They do mining, they do oil and gas development, but logging is one of the most common resources that they take from public land, and logging can be sustainable, but what's so important to understand is we really don't have a need to be extracting timber from our public land anymore. Almost all the timber in the United States comes off of private land. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 95%. So it really isn't something that's a good idea. It doesn't serve the best people. It's not the best use for the most people over the long run, which is what the first chief of the Forest Service described as his goals for managing, over serving the most people, the best use for the most people over the long run. And that's not what's going on. Unfortunately, it's able to be exploited by corporations and by just a few members of society, and the rest of the Americans suffer that use that land, that use that public land. And this is a national forest. It's not it is open. It belongs to every resident in the United States. So anyway, so we've got that issue, and currently we've got a couple issues right now. This one in particular involves a proposal for the Forest Service to log an area right next to a national natural landmark, and within the watershed of this national natural landmark. And what national natural landmarks are places that have been recognized by the National Park Service as being unique, having unique geological and natural features on a national scale, not on a statewide scale, local scale, or even a regional scale, but on a national level. And we have 4 of those in the Shawnee National Forest, 4 national natural landmarks. And Bell Smith Springs is one of them. It's also a very important recreation area. It's known for its biodiversity and its very clear streams. It's this canyon that 3 major streams come together and create this place. It's real popular in the heat of the summer because it's a popular swimming area. There's springs have water in them year round, and there's these deep pools that people like to swim in and stay cool.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's beautiful, and the Forest Service intends to log just under 70 acres of healthy hardwood forests, predominantly oak hickory forests, in that watershed right next to Bell Smith Springs. And 26 years ago, a judge told them, no, don't do that unless you take care to show us all that you're not going to cause the soils to erode and that sediment to flow into the canyon of Bell Smith Springs. Yep. And so the judge told them, you can't, I'm not going to let you do that until you go back and assure us that you're going to protect these steep slopes, these highly erodible soils. And the Forest Service still went. The Forest Service withdrew the project, which was a much bigger project, and just kind of relatively recently slipped this one in to try to. It involves a half mile of road building. And what's so important to understand with logging, with commercial logging, is anymore, it's a very mechanized project. They rarely are there people on the ground cutting trees. It's almost always mechanized, these big machines that come in that can go on any steep slope. They tear up the vegetation, cut the trees, strip them of their branches, measure it and cut it to lengths, and then another big machine that comes in, picks it up, puts the logs on a basket behind it, and all this stuff just obliterates the forest floor. Uh-huh. and disturbs the soil, removes the humus, and again, these are very steep slopes, highly erodible soils. So that's one issue. Another issue revolves around wilderness, designated wilderness in the Shawnee. And we have our largest wilderness area. We have 29,000 acres of wilderness in the Shawnee National Forest. So it's about 10% of the forest itself. And one particular area is Lusk Creek Wilderness, also happens to be in the middle of that. There's another canyon, and that is also a national natural landmark. And national natural landmarks are designated by the Park Service, but they're not managed by the Park Service. They can be privately owned by state governments, owned by other federal agencies, and that's what's happening. These are managed. They're owned by the Americans, but are the American public, but are managed by the Forest Service. And there's a proposal to build a 2.5-mile road into this wilderness area. And what's so important about wilderness is we just last September was the 60th anniversary of the Wilderness Act passed, and it's an incredible piece of legislation. as an activist, I've watched over 35 years, 36 years, our good environmental laws slowly get whittled away by Congress and different administrations.
Yep.
And the Wilderness Act has stayed relatively sound. And it's a very simple, I always encourage people to read the Wilderness Act if you can, because it's written more like prose than by typical legislation.
Sure.
But can I read a little bit?
Please do.
This act. A wilderness, in contrast with those areas where man and his works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. An area of wilderness is further defined to mean in this act an area of undeveloped federal land retaining its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or habitation, which is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions, and which generally appears to have been affected primarily by the forces of nature, with the imprints of man's work substantially unnoticeable. And that's directly from the Wilderness Act of 1964. And it goes through a number of prohibitions later in the act. And one of the prohibitions is except as specifically provided in this act and subject to existing private rights, and I'll get to that in a minute, there shall be no commercial enterprise and no permanent road within any wilderness area designated by this act, and except as necessary to meet minimum requirements for the administration of the area, blah, blah, blah. So there's one exception with roads and wilderness, and that's when there's a private inholding in a wilderness area.
Sure.
Public lands are full, especially federal land, of these private inholdings surrounded by public land. And so if there's someone that has a piece of private land, they can still have access to that, but nobody else can. So sometimes people build a road, but it's that individual's, that the property owner's responsibility and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is a proposal to build a 2.5-mile road that begins at one point on one boundary of this wilderness and ends on another boundary of the wilderness. And it goes in from the north and stops on the western boundary of the Lusk Creek Wilderness, where there's an 87-mile or an 87-acre private inholding. Now, it's not within the wilderness area,
right?
Is it? But it's surrounded by National Forest land, and it's actually on the east side of that private land, within a half mile to 3/4 of a mile. There's a county road. The landowners could access it through that avenue. Right. Through federally designated wilderness. At any rate, those are two issues that we hope we can stop. It's a long way off, but those create an urgent to take action. But what we've been really focusing on the Shawnee is an initiative to create Illinois' first national park and the nation's first climate preserve. Mm-hmm. And it would be named the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve. And it would involve transferring management of the Shawnee's 294,000 acres out of the Department of Agriculture. And to be honest, the Department of Agriculture is I shouldn't say that. It's presently not the best approach for overseeing public land. It's not the best agency. That's not what the U.S. Department of Agriculture is good at. The Department of Interior is much better, And the Park Service is probably the best, because of their focus on preservation in an unimpaired state, for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and generation of Americans today and for generations to come.
Right.
When you look at public land, that should really, in my opinion, that should really be the goal of all our land managers. Unfortunately, the Forest Service's mission is a little more focused on productivity and not nearly as much on the concept of preservation, much more on use.
Right.
And so those are the challenges that we face. But what we're proposing, and because we have 4 national natural landmarks in the Shawnee, again, designated, recognized for their unique natural wonders on a national scale rather than a regional, state, or local scale. And it's also a highly used area. And that the use of the Shawnee, the high use of it probably has a lot to do with its central location. We're not that far from Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis, Indianapolis, Nashville. A lot. It's a day's drive from all these places to come to the Shawnee. And unfortunately, the USDA Forest Service doesn't have a focus on recreation the way the Park Service does. It's not within their mission.
Right.
And they do recreation management, but it's not their priority. And I think actually the Forest Service, at the time the Shawnee was developed in the 1930s, it was a good agency because they planted trees on these degraded lands. They actually did built some recreation sites. They put a lot into developing and maintaining the infrastructure that I'm not sure the Park Service is nearly as good at doing.
Right.
But now we're to the point where a lot of our public lands, it just doesn't make sense. And it certainly doesn't in the Shawnee. The Shawnee, even though people don't think of Illinois as being forested, it represents about 7% of the forested land in Illinois. So there's a lot more other forested land.
Sure.
We have little to no industry that is ready to pounce on the natural resources found in the Shawnee. But the Forest Service, unfortunately, can't adjust. They struggle with that. They're always, it's an agency that is not able to shift to societal changes. The Park Service, on the other hand, is much better at that sort of thing. And what I like, besides the Park Service's commitment to preservation, is the fact that they really are good at education and storytelling.
Sure.
We have an incredible history down here. Several locations are known in the Shawnee, are known to be part of the Underground Railroad. We had a free African American settlement that was founded in 1840, I believe, or in the 40s, before the Civil War, that actually had nearby place that was a known stopover for the Underground Railroad. And there's also Cairo played a real important role at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. And also the Shawnee, when the Civilian Conservation Corps came to Illinois, Southern Illinois, there's actually an African camp, Civilian Conservation Corps camp on the Shawnee.
Like the African American specific group of the CCC
yes,
kind of thing. Okay.
The CCCs were segregated.
Yep.
And the CCCs did a great, helped a lot with developing some of these recreation areas. There's still, you can see these components of some of the structures they built and around on the Shawnee. And so there's some really good history at Cairo too. Cairo actually, when during the Civil War, that was General Grant's Fort Defiance, where he developed the area at the confluence to restrict the Confederate supplies going to the Confederate armies.
Right.
And because much of supplies were shipped on the rivers back then, which is a very strategic move by Grant. And it was also because of its central location. Troops would head out from Cairo. There was the Illinois Central Railway was established at that time, and so he could transfer, bring troops down and move them around relatively easily. So great history with Cairo. Plus, during the Civil War and after, all the freed enslaved African Americans from the South were actually put in concentration camps in Cairo. Believe it or not, we think, oh, that's a wonderful thing, the great emancipator. But they were these camps were considered. I'm trying to think of the term. It escapes me now. But they had to go into these camps, and then they were dispersed in a very controlled manner throughout the North. But they were considered contraband. They're still property at this point, free, but not really free. Some of that dark history that just continues to come to the surface as we dig into into our country's history. A good friend of mine refers to it as historicide. Has continued to occur, trying to change the history of our country. And the fact is, it is true. So now the Shawnee is unique. We've got these 7 wilderness areas. We've got these national natural landmarks, these important historical locations. The Trail of Tears, the Cherokee Trail of Tears went through what is now the Shawnee National Forest. And a lot of this is not well documented and not well, and what's so good about the Park Service is they're incredible storytellers. They can communicate, educate people about the history and about these places. And we really need to do that as a society, because otherwise we face repeating the dark parts of our history yet again without without that good history.
It sounds like the USDA has kind of outlived their usefulness in that role, and now there's other places that could be playing a much better role with Shawnee.
Right. And the sad part is too, the USDA, what they do most is subsidize industry. You think of the ag industry is highly subsidized. Farming is, I'm not saying we should not subsidize our farmers, right. But the Forest Service does the same thing, which in reality they should. I think it's important to subsidize the private timber growers, for instance. Help them so that their forests are productive, their forests are still provide wildlife habitat, that sort of thing. But who they're subsidizing is the timber industry, and the timber industry just comes in and takes the timber, and our government loses money.
Right.
And that's the terrible thing. That reduces the value of timber on private land. If the federal government had a program like the Forest Service for say growing beans and corn, the farming community would be up in arms because it would, it lowers the market, it lowers the value of their corn and soybeans,
right.
For good cause. So at any rate,
well, yeah, and you mentioned it already a little bit, but I'd like to get into a little bit more of the this idea of the Shawnee National Park and climate preserve. Have you talked a little bit about the vision there, and also, is that something that we can see coming together, taking shape under a Trump presidency, with Trump in power? Tell me about the Shawnee Park and Climate Preserve and what might happen here in the next 4 years.
Okay, so I think most people are familiar with national parks. This concept of national parks, but we have 63 national parks in this country. The Park Service manages a number of different public land other than parks, however. They manage recreation areas, they manage seashores, lake shores, rivers. There's battlefields, cemeteries, on and on. There's historic sites and historical parks. There's another designation that's called a national preserve, and there are 21 of them in the country. The first national preserves were the Big Thicket in eastern Texas and Big Cypress in southern Florida, which is just outside of the Everglades National Park. Most preserves are associated with national parks. Not all, but most of them are. There's only 21. There's 63 national parks. But their area is recognized as having many of the same features, important natural features as national parks and historic features, but they allow more flexibility in management. So a national park generally does not allow sport hunting, does not allow dispersed camping. Dispersed camping is camping, unorganized camping, I should say, is, you can camp in national parks, but you have to camp in designated places. You have to camp, you usually have to have it reserved. You can collect firewood in national forest. You can't generally in a national park. It's a much more controlled situation. And so what we're proposing is creating a national preserve off of about 90% of the Shawnee, where people can go off and hunt mushrooms, hunt and fish it. They have to follow the state regulations for hunting and fishing, but can do these things that they've grown accustomed to on the national forest. But it allows more flexibility with the Park Service. But we want to add one other twist to it. It's a national climate preserve. This would be the first climate preserve in the country. And what this came about as a result of our climate crisis that we are in. It's a climate emergency, to be honest. I mean, what is happening with our with climate change is so drastic. And it's happening so much more quickly than any of the scientists first predicted. That we need to take some drastic action. And one of the best things we can do for climate, we have to change our fossil fuel burning, the use of fossil fuels. We have to eliminate a lot of that because that's what's dumping carbon into the atmosphere, which is our number one climate warming component. And so we have to do that, but we also need to preserve our ecosystems because vegetation actually brings sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere, atmospheric carbon. So we already have too much carbon in our atmosphere, and as a result, it's starting to really change our weather patterns, and it's having very many detrimental effects. So the best thing we can do, in of all of our ecosystems on land, forests are the best at sequestering carbon because there's so much vegetation. You know, if you're familiar with forests, there's just many levels of plants. You know, you have the canopy trees, you have the subcanopy trees, you have the mid-story trees, and then you have the understory trees and shrubs, and then you have the ground vegetation. Yep. Every one of those layers has plants that photosynthesize. Photosynthesis is what captures carbon, and you know you can't have photosynthesis without carbon dioxide, and so those plants are constantly capturing carbon. Yep. And they store that carbon in the structures of the plants, and a good portion of it ends up in the ground. When you do commercial logging or any type of mechanized disturbance to the ground, carbon immediately starts escaping. And again, as I mentioned before, those logging does not involve just cutting a tree and pulling, you know, and just neatly taking it out and leaving the rest of the forest intact. Right. It doesn't work that way. These big trees, when they fall, they take other trees down with them, and then the machinery that goes in there is just really detrimental. Yep. And so that is, we want to create a climate preserve, a series of climate preserves that allow for all those other traditional uses with the exception of resource extraction. Mm-hmm. And you know, low impact recreation, you know, just again, that doesn't do a lot of disturbance to the ground. And now what we know about eastern deciduous forests, we've just recently learned that thanks to science and scientists studying this, that our forests are actually, the eastern forests are benefiting, which is kind of scary, from climate change a little bit. I shouldn't say that. The vegetation growth is benefiting. So primarily, it's extended our growing season a couple weeks on either side. You know, both the spring starts a little earlier, the fall is a little later. So that growing season is when photosynthesis is taking place and carbon is coming out of the atmosphere. But it also, it seems that it's bringing in more moisture. Unlike out west, it's bringing in a lot hotter temperatures, much more drought. Now, a lot of wind is happening all over. And storms are occurring more often than we used to. But, and those storms create disturbance, and forests for regeneration actually need some disturbance, you know, to replace the older trees that are suffering, that have died. Mortality happens in nature all the time. You need young trees to replace old trees, right. just like bird species, for instance, that are threatened. They need to have they need to be able to reproduce well to replace the mortality that happens to the animals, to the birds, to the mature birds. And so that is continuing to happen with the eastern forests. In fact, just recently, it's been determined that we have what's called a warming hole in the eastern United States. And it's not warming here like it is in many other parts of the globe. And that's because of the cooling effect of deciduous forests. They actually reflect more sunlight. The flat leaves tend to reflect better than conifer trees with needles. They transpire a lot, so they give off moisture through the foliage. And as the wind blows over that moisture, it's cooling. And this is well documented that while the western mountainous area and forests are rising in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 degrees Celsius more than the eastern forests. So it's actually physically cooling it, as well as taking that carbon out of the atmosphere that has to be done so that we can get back to a better balance. We're out of balance right now, and that's what's causing this warming effect, and that warming effect is causing all these different climatic changes. And so this would be the first, the Shawnee, and whenever you propose change, people resist change, and it's the most consistent component that there is. Whenever people resist that change, the hardest step is the first one to take. The
first step. Yep.
First accomplishment, and the Shawnee is the perfect candidate for that. If we make the Shawnee a climate preserve, that's not going to. We have to have more climate preserves. We need to go across the country and stop logging our national forest. There's even some logging that occurs on national parks. It's much fair. But people that think they can log their way out of wildfires, it's just a crazy, and it's not the case at all. But science is catching up with. We're getting good studies more and more as time passes, and we're able to make the case that no, that doesn't. Logging makes our forests hotter. It makes them drier. It makes them more flammable, and keeping the trees in the ground is the best thing we can do for our climate. So we're hoping that this can start a campaign,
right,
to have more climate preserve, shifting management away from this outdated, let's manage our way out of this crisis. Right. Instead of, no, we need to leave. Nature does a better job than we'll ever be able to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's, so 90% would be that climate preserve. And then, so I'm assuming then the other 10% would be that national park piece.
Yeah, and there would be different areas. Like we have the Garden of the Gods, which is probably our most photographed natural feature in the state of Illinois. Sure. These sandstone formations on a ridge on the Shawnee that overlook the Garden of the Gods wilderness and other areas. That would be the national park designated area. Bellsmith Springs would be, the designated area. We have a place over on the west side, LaRue Pine Hills, would be that as well. And that is, those would be the national park. I mean, there's more to it than that.
Sure.
That's our model. And we have a good model because the most recent national park that was designated is the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve. That's exactly what they did. And New River Gorge is located in West Virginia, and it's a very similar area to Southern Illinois. It was a heavily coal mine area, economically devastated when the coal seams ran out, when it became less economic, and when the higher sulfur coal was replaced by lower sulfur coal. Yep. All those things, it impacted the the coal industry there, just like they've impacted the coal industry in Southern Illinois. We have very, very little coal mining taking place here now. And now the area around the national park is just thriving. The New River Gorge, they took what was a scenic river, a wild and scenic river designation, and shifted it over to become the 63rd National Park. And it was designated in December of 2020. And so you had asked me about the Trump administration.
Right.
Now, as an environmentalist, I shudder at what the Trump administration has been doing to our public. What his whole he is not good for the natural world, nor for the benefit of most. It's more you benefit the wealthy and the powerful with the Trump administration. However, when presidents sign into law places like national parks, it is a legacy, an incredible legacy,
right?
That many Republican presidents. Theodore Roosevelt was one of our best conservationists, and he started this concept of creating more national parks and setting aside he established our national forest system. At any rate, the Trump administration actually signed into law the last 4 national parks. That being the New River Gorge is the most recent, the Indiana Dunes National Park, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, and it's in southern Colorado, the Sands. I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
But we are in a Republican controlled part of the state, even though Illinois is a very blue state. We have a congressman. We have 2 Democrat senators, and I think there's only one other Republican. There might be a third representative in Congress. The rest of the state is all is all Democrats. The state government is run by the Democrats as well. All houses of government. So this is something that I can see happening. Our congressman is a big Trump supporter and relied on him at not the most recent election, but one when Trump was still in office the first time. He held a Trump rally in Southern Illinois.
Sure.
And so I can see him wanting to help, supporting something that a Republican president would sign into law. So it does have a possibility of actually occurring during this Trump administration. So we are definitely going to keep pushing for this, and especially what the people that oppose it. And there is a vocal group of opposition, either are dishonest or don't really understand what we're proposing and how this would take place. People go to a national park and think all national parks are the same, and they're not. It's. I had a person contact me and tell me that they happen to know, and this was a couple of years ago. They happen to know that you can't walk your dog in national parks. It's a fact, and I've never even thought about it.
Right.
And really, so I started digging into it. It's pets are an incredible part of the Park Service's service. They actually have a Bark Ranger program. It's called Bark Ranger.
Okay.
about dogs and how, there are a couple national parks, for instance, Mount Rushmore is not open to dogs.
Sure.
But that's different. Think of all the, there's certain trails in the Everglades that are not open to dogs.
Right.
Think about dogs and gators. I've been in the Everglades, and I mean, you literally, there was a gator in the middle of the walkway.
Right.
It's like, there are some times when it's not, it's not appropriate.
And dogs are not always the best, known to be the best around different wild animals when they come in contact with them. They don't always make them the best decisions in those scenarios.
It's so cool. Like, for instance, Mammoth Cave, you can, you have to have your dog on a leash, but that's the same with,
makes sense,
with the Shawnee. Your dog is welcome, but you need to keep it on a leash. Everywhere, with the exception of going into the cave, and they have kennels right at the cave entrance for your whole system set up. It's free. You go on a cave tour, you kennel your dog for however long your tour is in Mammoth Cave. Anyway, it actually is I've learned a lot, but that person had an experience where they thought, and there's some trails at Yellowstone the same way. It's just not appropriate for dogs to be in large crowds of people,
but it was not, in fact, an indisputable fact across all national parks. But it also was something you hadn't been thinking about, so it was good to consider these pet owners and people like to take their dogs to the national parks or things like that, right?
It's been a very learning experience for me. And the more I learn, the more I realize this is the best thing for the most Americans and for the ecosystem itself to preserve.
Well, then that gets me, I love the Shawnee National Forest. My wife and I had the chance to be down there recently and connect with y'all and see some of the areas where they're proposing some of these bad ideas. And I'm 100% on board as far as I know with the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve. The vision sounds great to me. And I've actually been going down to Shawnee National Forest every year for at least 4 years now. Originally founded as a place to connect with a friend of mine from Indiana during the early years of the pandemic. But I didn't actually even know about the Shawnee Climate Park and Climate Alliance until I believe I heard you talking, I believe, on the Sojourner Truth Radio with Margaret Prescott. What do you've talked about a lot of different areas, things that are great in the park. What do you love most? What in the Shawnee National Forest? What is the thing that really, or what should people check out if they do go there? What is the thing that's, most impressive or meaningful to you?
There's
a lot.
Usually there's too many to accommodate someone in a few days visit. You need to give yourself a week, in my opinion. But
that's why I keep coming back. Even a week isn't long enough.
Bell-Smith Springs is a great place. A lot of it depends on the time of year that you're coming. Right now is spring wildflower season. Mm-hmm. Wildflowers in LaRue Pine Hills natural area is incredible. The Lusk Creek Canyon, Lusk Creek Wilderness is an incredible place. There's a huge bend in the creek, and there are 150-foot bluffs on either side of the creek. This horseshoe shaped loop that the river takes, or the creek takes. Beautiful spring-fed pools down at the bottom. I mean, it's rare ferns hanging on the sandstone walls. There's so much. Of course, Garden of the Gods with Camel Rock and some of these other formations are unique. We also have stoneface, a sandstone escarpment that looks like, I think it's New Hampshire that's known for old stone face or something like
I
that.
think that fell down or something, didn't it?
Yeah, I think
it's not there.
It's the thing that really sticks out that sticks out the most on the stone face
Sure.
extreme, and I think that broke off. And
Okay.
so yeah, that happens. Ours isn't as big as the New Hampshire one, but it's still it's his nose is still intact. We have natural bridges too. There's Pomona Natural Bridge, which is really a cool place in Jackson County on the west side. Just ferns hanging down in the sandstone. Just it's beautiful.
Yeah, I've been to the Natural Bridge a couple times. The road up to there is a little bit rough in places, but the bird songs, we always go down like kind of towards around the beginning of April, and that area in particular, I feel like when I go there, like the bird songs are just like another level beyond the bird songs in the rest of Shawnee or something. Cause I get there and I just hear all these different birds. They seem to, or maybe it's different birds. I don't know, but it's really neat. And I was really getting into fish crows. One of the last times I was down there, because they have a kind of a different call. They're a little different, and we didn't really know what are we hearing. And so we have our fancy apps on our phones now, and we used that and figured out about fish crows, and that was really cool. And we did hear a couple this last time we were down too, but not as much as we did last time when we were kind of on the western side. We heard a lot of them.
I like to refer to them as crows with a southern drawl.
Exactly. That's what that pretty much captures it.
Yeah, they always tend to be associated with water somewhere. Usually there's a lake or a wetland somewhere nearby, or a stream.
Yeah, apparently they're closer related to like the Jamaican crow or the palm crow or something than they are to the American crow. So it sounds like they kind of like traveled up. So that southern drawl piece, that kind of makes sense. They kind of traveled up. But yeah, they're really neat. They're and they have a really unique call. I don't know. Was there any other areas you wanted to mention?
Since you mentioned Pomona and birds,
yeah,
Pomona Natural Bridge, there is a place that is it's a known sanctuary for neotropical songbirds. It's called Cave Valley, and it's just south of Pomona Natural Bridge.
Oh, okay, maybe that's why.
And it is known to have the most diversity of neotropical migratory songbirds. Those are the birds that you don't see in the winter, that spend the summer in tropical climes, because most of them are insectivores. They eat insects. Well, as you know, when winter comes, there's not a lot of insects around.
Right.
In the cooler weather. So they come up as the insects populations start to erupt. And and what's so disconcerting too is we are facing an insect catastrophe.
That's true.
And our populations of certain insects are just plummeting. And it's probably related to climate. It's probably related to habitat. It's probably related to general pollution in general.
Right.
But this is the old saying that nature abhors a vacuum is so true. While certain numbers of insects are plummeting, the generalists then start to fill in that niche where they're missing in nature. And as a rule, the generalists tend to be more problematic for humans.
Right. Right.
And so we need, if these birds that rely on these specific insects, I mean, there's one, a black and white warbler's migration coincides with the leaf roller outbreak, and these so they tend to migrate at the time the leaf rollers. It's these little insect larvae that feed on the leaves of primarily oak trees, a number of different trees, but they cause the leaves to kind of roll up as they, as they have sucking mouth parts, and as they drain the fluid out of the leaves tend to kind of curl and roll up around the larva, and then eventually the larva just pupate on that rolled up leaf. And
sure.
So insects respond more to temperature than birds do. Birds respond more to their migrations are more photosynthetic. So they don't start their migration until the daylight. It's like, okay, we're getting more sunlight. The equinox is past. The days are getting longer. Now I know it's time to go north.
Right.
And when the days start getting short, they know it's time to head south, so that they can continue to have ample habitat, ample food.
Right.
And since insects are more temperature sensitive, they're starting to erupt sooner, and that really creates an imbalance that can have devastating impacts. It can either cause the insect populations to erupt so much that they have a negative impact on the rest of the trees in the forest, or another predator adapts to feed on them. That is what often happens in nature. A more generalist species starts feeding on the influx of those insects, and then the black and white warbler can't thrive on them. We've got the cuckoo. The yellow-billed cuckoo is a summer resident here, and they have a long kind of a curved bill, and that's designed primarily to puncture the webs of webworms, of a larva of insect larvae that are you'll see them up in trees in the spring. Most birds can't, most predators can't penetrate that web. It's real tight and it's hard to penetrate. Well, the cuckoo has a long enough and strong enough bill to actually get into that and feed off those little larvae. Mm-hmm. When those foods are impacted by climate change, that really can cause our whole ecosystem to go topsy-turvy, and we need ecosystems. There's this great thing called dynamic equilibrium that happens with natural ecosystems, and there's some changes that take place, but there's always change, but it also kind of balances itself out. When we shift those changes too much, you create more, you lose. It's more dynamic than it's equalized. That's a problem.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you speaking with me. We've covered a lot of things. Is there anything else that you want to say before you go or leave us with? I mean, one thing, where can people find you guys if they want to connect or support?
We have two options. Look up Shawnee NTLpark.org.
Yep. Shawnee
NTL Park. That's SHAWNEE NTL Park.org is our website. My email address is forestally1@gmail.com. That's FORESTALLY, the number 1, @gmail.com. And certainly reach out to us. Get out in the woods, wherever you are. Get out in the woods or even the prairies. Enjoy this natural world and the spring equinox. And by the way, Happy Muir Day, Nick. Today is John Muir's 177th birthday. And
Wow.
I do John Muir living history programs.
Oh, nice.
He's kind of considered to be the father of the national park
Right.
system and an incredible conservationist. I also just learned that this is National Park Week.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure what that
what that entails.
right.
Yeah. And that's our special interview. Thanks for listening. Solidarity.
This has been a Socialist News and Views special interview.